It's the second part of our record label special with Chris Cusack and Mark Fraser from the Unsung podcast. We went into great depth on Discord Records last week, but this week we're talking about Jade Tree Records, a label neither Fran or I had ever heard of. Who's on there? What kind of music? Some absolutely batshit music is what's on there, as you will see. And if you saw the social media posts, there's been a lot of double entendres, so I hope you enjoy.
Oh, hang on. Yeah, what are we calling this podcast?
Was it over underrated?
Over underrated. Sous-évalué. Überschätzt. Över underskattad. Over underrated.
Welcome back to part 2. We're discussing another record label, not from DC, but the suburbs of DC, I suppose is how it's been billed. So, guys, what is your pick for an underrated record label?
It is the legendary Jade Tree Records. Should be mentioned in the same sentence as Discord Records, but has not been for a very long time.
Why did you pick it?
I think let's go back to the start. This record label started in 1990 and it exists because of Discord Records. Right, they were influenced by Discord Records. Lots of really great record labels were influenced by Discord Records. We went over that quite a lot in last episode, so I won't go over old ground with that. But I think Chris and I both felt that there was more that we connected with. There's more interesting things on here, more diverse things on here as well. And a record label like to take chances in a way that Discord didn't. And I think they were overlooked as a result.
I think Jade Tree deserves a bit of credit because they took certain lessons from Discord. They were very heavily influenced by it. You couldn't be operating in DC and not be heavily influenced by it. They had a previous imprint from '87 called Action Pact, I think it was called, with an X, Action Pact, and then they kind of changed that into Jade Tree and kind of changed the remit of it a wee bit. And the things that they implemented from that Discord model were the kind of community responsibility, trying to develop the scene, that kind of side of things. But over the years, they seemed a bit broader in their musical tastes, and I think they were slightly more ambitious. They didn't have that. I mean, I'm not saying that Discord were anti-capitalist, but Discord and Fugazi and those kind of bands had like price caps on stuff. They were really careful about not engaging entirely with the capitalist scene. Jade Tree didn't do that, but it wasn't as their identity wasn't as all tied up in that. It was more of this is a small label that wants to put out records. I think they got distro through Touch and Go. Touch and Go were a very right on label as well. Touch and Go didn't actually use contracts either. Something we mentioned. We're talking about Discord, and it came back and bit them. But Jade Tree just seemed a bit less at the mercy of people's expectations, a bit less sort of defined by their austere seriousness, and there was more wiggle room as a result in terms of what they could engage with. And like as Mark says, I think I probably, with the exception of Fugazi, I probably listen to more Jade Tree records now than I do Discord records. I think they've lasted the test of time a bit more, and there's greater diversity. And it's interesting actually because there'll be records that you listen to and you're like, I forgot that was Jade Tree, and because it doesn't automatically sound like Jade Tree.
I think also the history of Jade Tree itself is a bit more interesting in the sense that Discord seemed to always be steady and a going concern. Jade Tree wasn't. When Touch and Go downsized and in 2009, they kind of led Jade Tree to downsize, which meant a lot that they didn't have a lot of bands on the go anymore. And then they've kind of grown since then. And then their entire catalog was purchased by Epitaph Records in 2017. Getting purchased by Epitaph Records actually tells you pretty much all you need to know about the influence of this record label. That a label that was also an indie. Way back in the day, Epitaph Records were no longer. They're probably the biggest indie if you want to split hairs. They're probably not an indie anymore. But the fact that they seen that there's value in that in obtaining that catalog tells you that there's definitely something here which deserves greater attention.
That's a really good point. Yeah, somebody was like, this stuff can't be allowed to just be deleted or to sink into obscurity. There's too much great music, within the back catalogue of Jade Tree, and Epitaph did us all a service, I think, by making sure that could still be found.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because when I was messaging my ex-boyfriend and telling him like, oh, I'm talking about Jade Tree hot water music, he was like, they weren't on Jade Tree, they were on Epitaph. And I was like, but did you know in 2016? He's like, oh, I suppose it's because they did the split. And I was like, again, all going over my head. But I wanted to ask you a bit more about the formation of it, because it seems to be formed by these two guys, Darren Walters and Tim Owen, who met at a punk show in Washington, D.C. So were they always the one steering it? Do you think part of the success is their friendship and the fact that it's a partnership?
I think Walters bowed out at some point to go to university, I believe. I think he was just vaguely involved with it. I don't think he fully pulled away from it, But yeah, it's always been, I guess, Owen, right? That's been the one that's been mostly shepherding the vision of the label, and I guess it falls to both of them, right? But for the most part, I think you're probably right in saying that their friendship's probably got something to do with that. Their shared love for music and just really standing behind the stuff they like.
I mean, let's be clear. It's another parallel with Discord, because Discord isn't just Ian Mackay's label.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Nelson set it up as well, so it's another duo. And again, that's something that gets constantly forgotten. Jeff Nelson just gets written out of history.
Was Jeff Nelson in bands, or was he just involved in Discord Records?
I actually don't know Jeff Nelson's musical background. I just know that both he and Ian got together and set up Discord early to put out that Teen Idol stuff. So yeah, but a duo and a duo spawning a duo, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I imagine that for your sanity, it's much better to have a partner for something like this, and yeah, with any kind of business, it's better to have two people rather than one. I know I wouldn't be able to do it without one. Fran, I hadn't heard of Jade Tree before Mark and Chris suggested it. Had you?
I hadn't heard of Jade Tree. I heard of a few bands on their roster.
Let's compare. Who do you know?
Alkaline Trio.
Yep.
Promise Ring.
Nope.
And Girls Against Boys are the three bands I knew. That was it.
I think I'd also heard of Pedro the Lion. That's
but I thought that was maybe more of an indie band. Are they?
Yeah. But
I've not actually heard them. Are they actually punk?
I think so, but maybe Mark and Chris.
Can you confirm?
I would say they're an indie band, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah, they're kind of like scene straddlers. There's a lot of crossover in them.
I literally didn't know the label at all. They sort of like became a bit more active recently, and they kind of like sort of downsized in the mid noughties, and then came back after 5 or 6 years. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's when they were purchased. That's when Epitaph purchased their back catalogue as well to re-release a lot of the old stuff
on vinyl, right? Is what I read. Yeah.
But was their best period for the 90s?
Late 90s, early 2000s. Yeah. I think pretty much all of the songs that we've picked actually cover that period.
Like the decade of like 98 to 2008 was kind of their peak era.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's the interesting thing about Jade Tree, as I was saying, is a lot of people don't acknowledge who was actually involved in Jade Tree, and maybe if you're not too familiar with the scene, a lot of the names don't register, but if you're even vaguely familiar with the post-hardcore scene, the emo scene, it's kind of astonishing to have it read out. So if you don't mind indulging me for a second, you got Alkaline Trio, doing this alphabetically obviously, Avail, legendary, Cap and Jazz, Sex, who we'll talk about, Fucked Up, Girls Against Boys, Jets to Brazil, Joan of Arc, who were just hugely influential in that scene. Kid Dynamite, Juno, actually, sorry, forgot them. Lifetime, Mark, can't forget them.
Yep.
Mika P. Hinson, New End Original, which is all looped in with Jonah Matranga of Far, because you had his one-line drawing project as well. Who else did you have? You had Owls, who actually quite recently were still doing really well. Pedro the Lion, as you mentioned. You had the Promise Ring, as you mentioned. That band Pitch Blend as well. They were pretty highly regarded amongst kind of scenesters. Strike Anywhere, I suppose. Texas is the Reason.
Ah, yes. Strike Anywhere. I remember.
These Arms Are Snakes, the band that followed Botch. The Turing Machine, who I'll mention. And Young Widows, the Kurt Ballou produced kind of noise rock, alternative rock project, which really fucking good. Like they have a lot of names that crop up in the pages of fanzines, and they're all under this one umbrella, and I really don't think they get credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, one band that you didn't mention, which Babs actually picked up on the point, when your pal was saying about that, it's like the Hot Water Music put on it just for that split release with Alkaline Trio. They're also a hugely influential band in the punk scene.
Yeah, I think Fucked Up and Strike Anywhere I've heard of as well, and I think because I looked at the list on the website of their bands, and I maybe I missed them, but yeah, Strike Anywhere definitely. I remember seeing, I feel like, a lot of logos of Strike Anywhere again from my ex-boyfriend. Sorry, Felix, really throwing you under the bus here. Fucked Up, I had no idea. No, they're pretty big.
Yeah, they only released one record on Jade Tree. I can't remember which one it was, one of the earlier ones, but yeah.
Underrated.
So I'm guessing, given your love for it, that you've picked 5 songs that you really think, or 5 acts that you really think are underrated and should be better known, right?
Definitely.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Mark picked a couple.
Okay. Well, let's get straight into it. So what's the first pick?
The first one I've picked is Lifetime. This was actually that's where the band that kind of got them to get reinvested in the label when they heard them back in 1995.
What track is it? Boys Not.
Yeah, but the track that I've picked is Boys No Good.
Yeah.
The Boys No Good, yeah. It's from their album Jersey's Best Dancers, which we've actually done on our podcast, and I believe is one of the most important and influential punk records, and I guess emo records of all time. If you go back to the last episode, there's a lot of comparison. You can hear a lot of similarities between them and Dag Nasty.
Yeah.
And I said in the last episode, I think there are other bands which would later go on to do what they did in a much better way, and I think Lifetime are one of those bands. Lifetime are one of my favourite bands of all time, so I was obviously going to pick them, right? This song is the best song on the album. It's in my top 10 best punk songs of all time. It's catchy as fuck. It's been covered by loads of bands, including like Rise Against and stuff like that. It's just got a huge melody, and I think it's just short and sweet, and I'm a fan of brevity. Contrary to popular belief, I'm a fan of brevity.
It's the last episode of your show.
Exactly.
Did not illustrate.
Yeah, exactly. So I think for me, Lifetime are a very underrated band. The Dan Yemin, who was in Lifetime, will later go on to form other underrated but also highly influential punk bands like Paint the Black and Kid Dynamite. And he was also in The Loved Ones for a bit. Just to give you a brief history, the singer from Kid Dynamite went on to form a band called Paint the Black, who are really good. Called None More Black. There's too many blacks. Called None More Black.
Jesus, don't clip that out, please.
And then, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be the social media clip now, but yeah, carry on.
God damn it. The Loved Ones was the singer, the guy called Dave Hawes, who's since gone on to like get increasing acclaim as a sort of folky singer-songwriter. He's doing really well for himself now. And Dan Yemin's still a quite a pivotal figure in that kind of melodic hardcore, early kind of more aggressive style of pop punk from this era, from the late 90s to the mid 2000s and onwards. So yeah, hugely influential band. I can't think of any punk band that I like or that I even know that is not influenced by this band. And if they're not influenced by this band, they're influenced by another band that I've picked on this list. So really, I'm kind of playing to my strengths here a wee bit. But
Chris, I feel like you're not going to be maybe as enthusiastic as Mark.
Oh man, I am very, very picky with my pop punk or my melodic pop punk or my melodic hardcore, whatever. I can I can take it or leave it. Lifetime, Don't Push My Buttons. I actually prefer Dag Nasty. I think they're raw and more interesting, but I do understand from Mark's perspective that people who are actually schooled on the scene have a lot of time for them. I think it's worth acknowledging how influential they were and how much they kind of refined the formula. Yeah, so I mean, it's a great band to have under your umbrella if you want to be in the conversation. And, Jade Tree, unlike Discord, did kind of go for a music that was a lot more on the nose, pop punky. The Discord stuff very rarely strays close to that kind of commercial territory. I'm not saying Lifetime are massively commercial, but they're a little bit closer to what you might expect. But I mean, I think it's a worthwhile mention, even though I wouldn't listen to it. It's definitely a worthwhile mention, just purely for kudos and respect and prestige and prominence. Yeah.
Fran, is the boy good or the boy bad?
The boy is quick. Yeah, I enjoyed the Machine Gun Drums Dirty Bass. It's got like an 80s hair metal kind of vibe, and I put down post Billy Idol oi vocals.
Yeah, that's real good.
A nice short punk quickie, and I put down I would not want to be that boy.
Yeah. I think the album's less than half an hour long, mate.
Oh
So.
yeah, beautiful. I like that. Like King Adora, if you remember that band.
King Adora, yeah, of
Yeah,
course, yeah.
wow.
Glam
Yeah.
rock from London.
Yeah,
is it?
well, Birmingham. I think Birmingham. Yeah, the album's like
Birmingham,
22 minutes long.
Wow.
But I know, Babs. Enough about King Adora.
Yeah, definitely from what we've heard. I enjoyed the bass line on this, but I'm afraid that's about it. Yeah, melodic anything is not usually my cup of tea, and pop punk really is a genre I probably would say I dislike. I never got into emo. Emo didn't push my buttons either, so that's why I'm so ignorant about so much of the these bands, and especially any kind of origin bands. I don't know them either. The drums at the beginning almost sound like they're out of time, which is maybe the point of it, but it really threw me off. I didn't like it. But interesting to hear about how, yeah, again, another influential band that I'd never heard of. It seems to be the theme. And well, going to what I heard of, just going back quickly, I wondered why with Strike Anywhere that you mentioned, I was like, logos, they had that very striking logo with the 3 arrows. I've just looked it up, and I'm pretty sure I saw that logo doodled or stamped all over the place. That's why, and it's so funny because that's all I could remember. That it was very like buried in my memory, but very good branding there, guys. Well done.
Jade Tree's a good punk sticker band. You know, that era where punk stickers were the thing. There's a lot of these that you'll see around.
That Strike Anywhere logo is actually, I think it either is or is their take on an anti-fascist action logo,
right?
Which is why you've seen it a lot of places, because they are I mean, they are a vegan straight edge band, but not in the way that they would have been like the people that came out of Discord and became puritanical about it. Thomas is a pure anarchist, like proper in squats, right on environmentalist kind of guy. So they've obviously never done anything big as a result of that, but that Strike Anywhere's ethos has always been in that kind of area,
Interesting. Well, we're not gonna. I think that's the end of our Strike Anywhere chat, because we're gonna move on to the second pick. What is your second song?
I'll do Hot Water Music, God Deciding, and then Chris can have the floor. So like I said earlier on, I was going to go with Texas as the reason, because their album, Do You Know Who You Are, particularly the song Back and to the Left, was the first thing that popped into my head when I thought about Jade Tree. But then I found out that wasn't released in Jade Tree Records, so I was a bit sad.
Yeah.
Even though that is a foundational punk, a foundational emo record.
Mate, it still counts, right? Because we mentioned Jawbox in the context of Discord, and Jawbox's best stuff wasn't released on Discord, let's be honest. And Texas is the reason were really key, influential, like important band in the development of post-hardcore and emo. Like really, really interesting period of it when it's quite raw and very sincere. So I actually was, I liked the fact you were going to mention them, but yeah, unfortunately that track in particular wasn't on this.
Yeah, because they did a split with the Promise Ring, who are another quite foundational band from that scene, and that was on Jade Tree Records, but I'm not as familiar with that as I am with their amazing debut album, Do You Know Who You Are? So I had to pick something else. So it came down to try to figure out what I really loved. And then the best split EP that's ever been released by any two bands of all time was released on this record label. It was Alkaline Trio and Hot Water Music split.
Oh shit!
Yeah, well, I think it's fucking phenomenal, to be honest. But I think so. This is a really interesting time for both these bands. So this is 2002. This record comes out. Alkaline Trio are hot. They've just released From Here to Infirmary. They're getting big. They're on the radio. That was released on Asian Man Records. They were on the radio, doing that label, a indie label, a good service by just having that sound and getting that push. And it worked out for them, because their next record was on Vagrant Records, Good Morning, which is when they really started to obviously become stratospheric. Matt Skiba then joined Blink-182. Alkaline Trio became a really big concern in their own right. Similarly, Hot Water Music had just released, or were just about to release in 2002, the same year this came out, Caution on Epitaph Records. So that was their defining moment as a band as well. So both these bands are in like the nexus of when they're both at their peak or about to really hit the big time, whatever that means for a punk band. I was drawn to this particular song because I saw Hot Water Music in November and they couldn't do a full band set because half the band was stuck in Florida because of the hurricane. So they did a half acoustic set and had some of the support bands play 5 electric songs, and Chuck, the singer, played this song, God Deciding, on acoustic. I never thought I'd ever see that song live, let alone Chuck doing it himself. So maybe I'm a bit more emotionally attached to this song than I necessarily should be. It's a fairly typical hot water music song. I love the call and response vocal. I love the way the bass just rattles throughout it. It's really syncopated with the drums, and it just has this really kind of almost like it's about to break apart quality, which is what I really loved about the early hot water music stuff. The fact it came out in Jade Tree is just a dicing in the cake for me. And the fact I could talk for this long about this band on this podcast.
Now, Chris, what do you have to say?
I don't have a lot.
It's not
to
the
add.
strongest song. I'll totally admit that when we know that to be true.
Yeah, we've done an episode on hot water music, at least one episode. It felt like many, and
you enjoyed them. Fuck up.
yeah, I mean, I don't have a massive.
You were
beef
getting
with
on
hot...
so well. Yeah, please fall out on our podcast. That'll be good for our
that's fine.
publicity.
Don't worry,
Yeah.
this is the taste of what you
Yeah,
can expect.
go.
I don't dislike hot water music. Again, small amounts. That's perfect. They've got some really good stuff. I don't think this is necessarily it, but hugely influential band. Again, I'm going to be diplomatic because I don't want to weaken our case here. They deserve to be mentioned because they're a very, very, very important band in terms of the development of this scene, the diversity of the vocal styles, the incorporation of slightly kind of Americana influences into punk music, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, they're great. They're people that love them. I'm very happy for them. Mark is one of them. I love Mark. I'm glad he enjoys them. I have probably not listened to a hot water music record of my own volition since about 1999.
You missed the best period, mate.
Yeah, it's not essential to me at all. I would much rather have selected any number of things for this. I do concede that they should be raised because it's, again, a really impressive inclusion in the pantheon of stuff on Jade Tree. It's one of those bands you're like, holy shit, like you said about is it Felix? Like you said about him, like it's like, holy shit, yeah, they were involved with that. They do count, and that's a hefty scalp to have in your back catalogue.
Fran, were you burnt by hot water music or a bit more lukewarm? I'll stop with the puns soon, I promise.
Please don't.
You were talking about the call and response. I believe, is it Chris Walland? Is that his name? Yeah. I think I prefer his vocal. Like, what's the split between lead vocals in the band? Because they share.
Yeah, they do share them. It's actually quite interesting because in this period and before that, Chuck is writing the more angular songs, but more the period they're in now, Chuck's voice is going into this like really whiskey soaked, like Bruce Springsteen-esque yell, and it's phenomenal. It sounds battered like he is, do you know what I mean? But he's also writing more Americana style stuff, so he's way more singer-songwriter now. Back then, Chris Willard was the guy for that. So I can totally understand why you'd prefer his voice. He's got their best songs as well, I think.
It's got a fierce bass line. It didn't inspire me. The lyrics seemed quite interesting. But yeah, I just wanted to know, like, if this was sung by Chris Welland, would I have enjoyed it more? I wasn't a massive fan of Chuck's voice, but that's just me. Babs?
I also really didn't like Chuck's voice. I preferred this song to Lifetime. Again, they're a band that I think Felix was into, but I couldn't really remember them. But yeah, I enjoy it when it's instrumental, but I don't enjoy it when his voice comes in and the I've written that the melody is tuned up. I think it packs in a lot for 2 minutes 37. And like Fran, I was very intrigued by the lyrics, very poetic. And Mark, I imagine a song with lyrics like this. So I'll just read a bit from the beginning. Transgressions are made while cowards convey, with a demon's ear fixed and set to slay, while the statue awaits to be whittled away with a mock of a slogan for hiding filth with fear. Like, seeing that acoustically where you can hear the lyrics more and all you have is that really must have hit you hard, right? So yeah, I can totally I would be very intrigued to hear this acoustically. I think I would like it a lot more. Well,
especially his voice has changed so much. Well, not changed so much, but it's grown into a lot more, and he's a lot more Americana-esque. That bit at the end, without sight, without sound, it was spine tingling. Just acoustic, it was brilliant.
I mean, yeah, Fran, I think you normally, I guess if you have time, when we go through the playlists, you look at the bands playing live. Did you do that for all the bands? Like, did that change some
Yeah,
of your
and
opinions?
he dedicated this to his wife, which is interesting.
Mhm.
But yeah, I listened to most of these live. Well, I mean, what is interesting is that usually we like to watch the music videos, and there is not a lot of music videos for these artists. It's basically just a still picture on YouTube with like 2 comments saying "best band ever."
They're both for me, so
I was gonna say how many from you. Yeah.
One of them's Mark's real account. The other one's Mark's
Burner
drunk.
account. Yeah.
He's
a burner, yeah.
got a drunk burner account. Yeah.
So yeah, I did watch them live. This is why I noticed the Fugazi live one as well, which was the most impressive one I saw. But yeah, his voice wasn't great, but I think it was probably from this period, like maybe 20 years ago. So,
But yeah, just to finish, I didn't dislike the song. I didn't even dislike Lifetime. Given that a lot of this is post-hardcore and melodic hardcore, which are genres I normally don't like, I was like very pleasantly surprised that all the songs were listenable, and I got some enjoyment out of it. But I guess we're moving maybe a little bit away from more classic punk with your next pick.
Yeah, so I believe it's Girls Against Boys.
Am I taking the floor here?
Yeah, it's all
Right.
yours, mate.
So let's get serious about this, right? Because this band is fucking brilliant. Actually, I flew to Italy to see this band last year and ended up meeting them. And Scott McLeod, the kind of main cool guy in the band, did a congratulations message for my friend who just had a baby like that day. And the guy was so overwhelmed by how nice the message was that he started crying spontaneously and sent me a video back of him just crying on the phone. I love Girls Against Boys. They're a band with a kind of slightly patchy history. I think their really early stuff is okay. 80s versus 90s from their early era doesn't really do a lot for me. They get into their first kind of album proper, Venus Luxure #1 in 93, Cruise Yourself 94, House of GVSB, which was the anniversary tour I was seeing in 96, and then Freakonica in 98, which is a very questionable move. They moved to David Geffen's label for that, and that Girls Against Boys kind of swept up in the big, early 90s alternative rock feeding frenzy, the post-Nirvana thing where like Helmet and all these, basically any alternative thing was getting dragged into boardrooms and money thrown at them. And Girls Against Boys were super cool. Like, it was always a big part of their look. They had 2 bass guitars for starters, so they had a kind of unconventional approach. Wore like shades and leather jackets on stage. They were like a little bit out of place, but got a lot of sync on show. So people will probably recognize them from Clerks, and they did a lot of stuff with like Kevin Smith and appeared in that kind of thing. They were seen as being quite cool and quite counterculture and zeitgeisty in the early and mid 90s. Again, I really, really like them. They rubbed some people up the wrong way. The Freakonica album made them a lot of enemies, and I think got them dropped. It's their highest selling album, but it got them dropped. But then off the back of that, they brought out this album called You Can't Fight What You Can't See. And for me, and this will probably outrage the purists, but for me, it's their best record. I think it's fantastic. And it came out in Jade Tree. And that was sort of this band taking quite a humble step down. This band that was seen to have crested and was now in decline, because their Geffen record, whilst it sold okay, was a bit of a critical flop. Well, not a flop, but it got very mixed reviews. And then they came back with this record that felt a lot more back to the roots. It wasn't overproduced. It had a lot more focus in the songs. I've picked the track BFF, Best Friends Forever.
Forever, please. Best Friends Forever.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I particularly like that song because it's Girls Against Boys at their sort of most melodic. They did a lot of stuff that could be quite druggy and stonery and cool, but BFF, they really commit to the musicality of it. They commit to the kind of hookiness of it, and I think it really works for them. But the record in general that they brought out is just really great. It starts with a track called Bass Station, which, for a band with 2 bassists, it makes a lot of sense. It's really, really banging. The second track in that, All the Rage, they used to have this motif they did in their albums where their second tune would have a really staccato but catchy riff. They did that. But they also had a bit of diversity in this record. I think there's a track called The Come Down, around about 10 or 11, that's a much druggier, slower, quieter affair. It's a very, very, very good record. So, albeit they only brought one album out in Jade Tree, for me, it's their best record. Actually, I think there's a very good chance we'll do an episode of it on our own podcast because I love it and it's overlooked. I mean, they're a little bit overlooked as a band, but it's certainly overlooked within their roster of stuff. They have a really interesting sound. They're still going. They still really work live. Because the vocals were kind of cool and drawled. The way they did it was very like that. Yeah, quite breathy, very New York. It meant that when they got older, the vocals didn't suffer. This is a thing that's happening with a lot of these kind of legacy touring bands. That they're getting to a point in their career where they can't do their vocals. They can't add that same energy. And Girls Against Boys don't have that. They're still playing really, really well. I guess their drummer would probably be the most at risk of fatiguing, and he's fantastic still. But the vocals still work the same way they always worked. So in a weird way, perhaps by accident, good luck, that approach they took that alienated some people early on has given them a lot of longevity. And so they still really work. And yeah, it was really nice to see that. It was really nice to see them still kicking it, still really sounding relevant and like really making the most of these tunes. And I just wish more people were into them. And I wish more people remembered them for these kind of moments as well, and not for some of the kind of lamer sync moments or, that goddamn Geffen album, which was their biggest seller.
Mark, what's your view on Girls Against Boys?
Pitchfork hated this record, which I thought was quite interesting. It sounds like the kind of thing
so it's good.
They'd like. I mean, this song is supposed to be cool, right? It's got some nice guitar tones to it, nice bass tones. The bass tone is fat like that. The vocal sort of Gen Z slacker vibe just tunes me.
Gen X, man, Gen X.
Sorry, Gen X. Sorry, I keep getting my letters.
They were the Gen X band, by the way. They were.
They sound like it as well, mate.
If they worked with Kevin Smith on Clark's, absolutely.
Yeah. That vocal just pulls me right out of the whole vibe, man, and I just can't get with it at all. But the fact that this was released on Jade Tree, I think, is definitely another feather in your cap. Absolutely, I did listen to this album, and there are a lot of songs in this record that I preferred.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a bit confused as to why you picked this one. But it's more melodic, so it does make sense.
Yeah, this was the melody one, and there are more rocky tracks on this and druggier tracks in this. But I just liked the fact they took a gamble and went for a song you could sing.
Mm-hmm. There's a big Discord vibe with this band as well, Scott McCloud was in Soulside, who were a Discord band. Brendan Canty was the original drummer. He put in Fugazi. Yeah,
you can see loads of posters from the 90s of Girls Against Boys on bills with Fugazi and Helmet in the same night, and Sonic Youth and stuff. They were really in there with a lot of these bands. Just some people were a bit sniffy because it was kind of clear that Girls Against Boys went for a cool vibe, and that alienated some of the more kind of slacker bands. I don't think the Melvins probably thought very much of them.
Yeah, I mean, coming to it cold now, I never heard this band before, really properly, and it hasn't aged particularly well for me. But it's impressive that they went. This was the label they picked after Geffen. I'm pretty sure they would have had their pick of indies after being in Geffen. Do you know what I mean? Having them on Jade Tree, I think, is just another reason as to why this record label is underrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fran, had you heard of Girls Against Boys? Yeah, you had, right?
I had it, yeah. But I was going to ask, so this is from 2002, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did their 90s track sound similar to this, or is this more melodic than their usual sound?
Well, this track is in the kind of the more melodic area of their sound overall, but the album itself is pretty consistent with certainly Venus Luxure and Cruise Yourself, and maybe even House of. It's not consistent with Freakonica because they moved to a major and overproduced the shit out of that album, and it sounds slick and slightly plasticky, like the 90s, that era where you had like Cooper Temple Claws and all that kind of stuff, and it was just kind of slightly digital recording was coming in. It feels a bit like that, like early era digital recording, not very human. But the analog sound of the early stuff and this, I think, are pretty consistent. I would happily take Freakonica out of their catalogue, to be honest.
Because I was going to say, it reminded me of Idlewild, and I wonder if Idlewild were influenced by Girls Against Boys.
Idlewild were big fans of the alternative 90s scene, so I think it's hard to imagine they weren't at least familiar, if not keen on them. I mean, the original bassist was a Bob Fairfall. I mean, Bob's bass guitar tone was quite consistent with Girls Against Boys, quite clanky, quite rugged.
But yeah, I put down the chilled rock vibes. Sounds more 90s. Reminds me of a lot of the Dandy Warhols in the vocal delivery.
Yes,
and if you
yeah,
got that,
absolutely.
Babs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I enjoyed the chorus, and it made me want to jump around with a baggy jumper like Waddy Womble. So, thumbs up for me.
Yep. Just miss out Freakonica and go back and check out some of their earlier stuff.
Thank you.
So, a huge coincidence with this band. So, I saved Bulletproof Cupid back in 2019 on Spotify.
What a tune! What a tune!
Absolute tune, but completely forgot I had done so until about 2 weeks ago when I regularly go through my saved tracks. And I was like, well, this is a fucking great track. And then I went to look at the artist info. Who are they on? Jade Tree Records. And I was like, what? And then I was like, oh, we're talking about them. Fantastic. So when I went in to listen to this song, I was like, well, I'm sure it's going to be more like that. And it isn't. It's quite different. So at the beginning, I was like, oh, okay. Like this isn't, with Bulletproof Cupid, it gets you in immediately with that guitar line. But I quite enjoyed this, despite it being a bit more melodic, like you say. I really like his voice and the way he enunciates the lyrics. As I said, my BFF, my best friends forever. But then you kind of want to punch him, but you don't. This is the thing, like he's very louche. I feel like the delivery is somewhere between like sneery and brassy, but I'm on board, and especially the way he delivers. It's great to be a rock and roll star no matter where you are.
Yeah.
And I for the longest time I was like, who does he remind me of vocally? And I put, is it something Black Francis, something more grungy? Is it something more conversational, even like going towards Fred Schneider from the B-52s? I couldn't quite figure it out, but I think it's an amalgamation of everything. I think Lou Reed is something, and Courtney Taylor is something. Yeah, no, I enjoyed this, but it wasn't at all what I was expecting following Bulletproof Cupid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I have to, between the two, I much prefer Bulletproof Cupid, but those are now the only two songs I've heard of theirs 9 years apart, so I think I need to go and explore a bit more.
Yeah, their choppier stuff, their more riffy stuff is great as well. It's really it's good dance floor indie as well. You can move to it.
Do you listen to albums start to finish? Do you love concept albums? Are you always the first one at a party to bring up King Gizzard? Say no more. The Album Concept Hour podcast has everything you need. We have hot takes.
It's like Voltron.
It's just like Voltron. It's like Voltron with jazz. This is emo. This is Willie Nelson's emo trip. Bad improv attempts.
That was.
Let's all do our best Aussie accent.
Let's not.
Let's alienate all the Australians.
And sometimes we even learn something. As they listened again and again to the song in the control room, Axel started saying, "Where do we go? Where do we go now? Where do we go?"
Shut up.
Spencer turned down the music and said, "Why don't you just try singing that?" And thus the last part of the song was born. Listen to the Album Concept Hour wherever you listen to podcasts.
Next pick, a rather long song.
Goodness.
What's your fourth pick?
Got my rock pants on. Yep, this is another one of mine. I'm pleased it made
100% a Chris choice.
Yeah. So it's from an album called A New Machine for Living. I saw Turing Machine completely by accident at an ATP that was curated by Shellac. And it was when it was down near Wales. I can't remember what one that is. And they were fucking brilliant. Absolutely brilliant band. Really, I don't know, like really hard for me to. They just seemed really out of scene. They seemed like they'd missed the boat on so many scenes. And I know a lot of people feel like that about them. And I think it's one of the reasons that they remained so obscure whilst other bands were succeeding. I mean, I guess Mogwai were succeeding over here. You had Slint before them over there. You had slightly more upbeat stuff that came after them, like Maserati. But the Turing Machine just seemed to miss all the boats. It isn't helped by the fact that their drummer, Jerry Fuchs, Fuchs, Gerhard, I believe is his real name, but Jerry Fuchs died. He died in a really bizarre accident involving an elevator shaft. I mean, a really horrible, tragic ending. And they posthumously finished and released an album called What is the Meaning of What, with the stuff that he'd recorded plus a whole load of additional instrumentation by people like LCD Sound System, one of the members of the Yeah. They were kind of like a big respected band in the underground, to the extent where, peak career LCD and Yeah would get involved in their stuff. What's his name? James Murphy. had this album, this first album, James Murphy had actually produced it. So it's like, DFA, LCD Sound System produced, and that over the course got them a little bit more kudos, but it didn't really take at the time. Some of the criticism, contemporaneous criticism, was that they were doing something that Don Caballero had already sort of done a bit. And yeah, for me, they kind of mixed that. I mean, Don Caballero I really like, but they're a lot jazzier. They don't often just kick into a groove, whereas this was like a bit straighter, a bit more krautrock. I think this also had a bit more of things like Les Savy Fav in it, a bit more of that accessible thing. I mean, bearing in mind that Les Savy Fav, some of their early stuff, like The Sweat Descends and all that kind of stuff, were quite bass-led and quite club-focused. And Turing Machine for a long time tried to get that. This stuff, I don't think is their best stuff. It's on Jade Tree, but I thought it was worth mentioning because it showcases how diverse Jade Tree were in their programming. Turing Machine's last album, the posthumous album, What Is the Meaning of What, is definitely, for me, their best record. Zwei is good as well now. And also, I think Steve Albini was somehow involved in Zwei, although it's not really that easy to find out what he did in it. But certainly he also programmed them for that ATP concert. But yeah, they slowly edged towards a dancier, krautier sound after starting with this kind of like instrumental alternative post-rock thing that they were doing at this point. But it's still a good sound. It is a little bit long, but that's kind of the nature of krautrock anyway. It's all about evolving riffs and getting a wee bit of hypnotic effect going on. And yeah, I just think they were a little bit overlooked. For me, they kind of fit with some stuff like Shipping News and stuff as well, just a little bit more direct and driving. And I feel a bit bad for them. I feel like they're a band that got a lot of bad breaks. Like, they had a lot of potential, missed a couple of boats, had this horrible tragedy with the core member dying, lost all their momentum, and yeah, it's a pity, but there's some really great stuff in their catalogue. And if you're somebody that does, indie disco DJing and stuff like that, certainly some of the tracks from that last album, What Is the Meaning of What, will slip right into a set, and people will be dancing and won't even know what it is.
About how long are the other songs? Because this is kind of an epic.
Yeah, the later stuff gets a little bit shorter, a little bit more succinct. It's like 4 and 5 minutes. They still have the odd epic. I mean, they've got longer songs in this as well. But that was, again, Hallo Gallo, Noi, all those kind of those kind of tracks. They were all coming in at like 10, 11 minutes. That's kind of the nature of the beast.
Mark, do you agree with Chris that they're a bit overlooked?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, Jerry Fuchs is certainly a talented drummer. I mean, I never really listened to them before. Chris mentioned them. I mean, that guy could fucking play. Like, 100% Chris choice. Like, krautrock meets post rock. Definitely Chris, man, all over. But there's some cracking guitar tones on it. I really enjoy the driving rhythm of it as well. Yeah, the fact that this was on Jade Tree is just mind blowing to me. Yeah, and I think that's the whole point, right?
That's the whole point exactly of what we're saying. Like, what you have here is the perfect illustration of how Jade Tree had a fairly easy option at their disposal here, which was like, stick to a thing. We've got a thing, stick with it, But they didn't. They just kept taking gambles in these like far-flung bands. Oh, Girls Against Boys are on the market because they've been dropped by Geffen. Let's approach them and put out something that doesn't sound like it would be on our label. Oh, Turing Machine, this new band, they've got a really interesting sound. Let's try that. And I love that about it. And I think already we've got one more to go that's going to really blow the doors off. But already I think they've shown their cards. They're like, we are willing to just put good music out and not be too married to our self-image or other people's expectations of us.
I think that's my ideal of a record label, being like, we are going because we're excited and we're interested in the music rather than because it fits into a certain bracket. That's for sure. Fran, rock pants on, rock pants off. Which one?
Always off. But yeah, I guess it's hard for a record label to market an instrumental band, really, isn't it?
That's also on my notes. Yeah,
radio play is going to be limited. There's only a few bands who can do it. You mentioned Mogwai, probably the most famous, maybe in the UK,
probably in the world.
Yeah, for maybe an instrumental artist. But yeah, I mean, it showcases drummer skills that I was kind of gutted to read what happened to him, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Maybe 9 minutes is a little bit too long without any vocals.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I certainly in this album, they were a work in progress. The Zwei album is good. It's an improvement.
I was waiting to maybe go somewhere different. It didn't really reach anything like a climax or anything. There's some interesting sort of like train horn guitar sounds and some weird things happening. But yeah, no. But I mean, I listened to it 3 times. I didn't skip it, so yeah, I found it interesting. Now you've mentioned they have other sides to them, I might go back and check out the other tracks. But yeah, Babs.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that, Frank, because I thought you might hate this precisely because I might have thought that you thought it didn't go anywhere. I really enjoyed it because I think it creates a world for you to get lost in, right? And I think it does go somewhere because it does build to these incredible drums, as you say. Even the fact that when it finishes, it doesn't finish completely. There's this kind of 20 seconds of this weird synth sound because it's like it's been building. It's almost like, okay, we're gonna let you back into the world, but not completely. We're gonna finish with this. So I was really impressed. And again, this was a left turn, but nothing like the next left turn that we're gonna go on. But yeah, obviously, unsurprisingly, this playlist is already showcasing much more diverse sounds.
Yeah, can I just say for anybody that is curious about checking out their other stuff, including you guys, check out either Slave to the Algorithm or Sex Ghost.
Good titles.
Yeah.
Spelled with a C or S?
It starts with an S, but that's going to change shortly. Yeah, Sex Ghost, controversially starting with an S, but both are really, really good and a bit more immediate.
Okay, great. Speaking of immediate.
Speaking of sex.
Speaking of sex, yeah.
I think Fran made a joke that he'd visited the shop before.
I was going to say the only like band on Jade Tree so good they have an entire chain named after them.
So who has picked this one and wants to introduce it?
Guess.
Shocked.
So yeah, this is Kill Me by Sex. Yeah. I think this guy must have like built his sounds from machines that he found in Sex, right?
For non-British people, because I actually don't know what Sex is. It's a shop, right?
It's a second-hand store, but people who work there are people who probably go to Reading Festival every year.
Yeah,
is that kind of right?
Yeah, they do like tech. They do tech and video games and DVDs and CDs and stuff.
Yeah, was it
Visual
Computer
build.
Exchange?
Computer
Yeah.
Exchange, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So the artist is called Sex S6E8b.
Sex with a CEX, yes. And can we also point out that Sex's first album was Cells with a C, so Sex Cells, which I think
see what you're doing there
deserves a round of applause. Sex is a really interesting project. This track is from the album Marland Mansions, right? So Marilyn Manson, but it's Maryland. So if you're mispronouncing the state, it says Maryland Mansions, but it's not. It's Marlin Mansions because he likes to do shit like that. It's actually kind of the project of one person, Ryan. Is it Claybrook Kidwell? I think his name is. He started this in '98 when he was 16 years old, and since then, Sex CEX6 has become sort of interchangeable with him as a person, but not entirely, because there are periods in the band's history where it's expanded into a bigger lineup, and actually the sound has changed quite a bit. As I said, the first album, Cells, is weirdly experimental electro. It's like 73 minutes long. In fact, the early records are all quite long. They're pretty challenging in that respect, but musically, especially given he was a 16-year-old, those early records are really fucking good. Second album, Role Model, 70 minutes, 2000 it came out. Electro with like hints of Aphex Twin, and totally decent stuff. If you're into Aphex Twin, I don't think you would turn your nose up at it. Third album, Oops, I Did It Again, where he starts to have a little bit of fun with the titles and stuff. A lot of the stuff that they do is pretty tongue-in-cheek, admittedly. 2001 is a little bit sparser, quite percussive. Actually has a lot of like trip-hop in it. It's got a real Bristolian vibe to it. And all of that early period of this band or this project was classified as IDM, as intelligent dance music, as David would say.
Yeah.
And not long after, he was collaborating with Venetian Snares, another band we covered, or another project we covered on our podcast, a Canadian sort of trip hop breakbeaty electronic project.
Basically Insanity.
Yeah. So like immediately, like we're talking about an IDM band, and yet this is coming out on a label like Jade Tree. And whilst this album, Marilyn Mansions, doesn't sound as electro as that. It's a bit more, it straddles it. It's also just a bit more oddball. Like it has fun with weird vocals and things like that. It's still like completely left field. And at this point, Sex or Ryan, was his live shows became pretty unhinged. There was sort of like a slightly Beck vibe to him. Like it was auteured. He was very much playing with a lot of the tropes of the genre, like leaning into them, but also kind of a lot of it was quite ironic. You never really knew. The live shows he started to freestyle a lot of vocals, and apparently that one of the things was that the vocals were they were into their braggadocio. So it was like sort of a satire of hip hop, what hip hop was becoming at the time. He would like strip down his pants on stage, this like kind of runty guy, just bit bragging and pointing at the crowd and playing up to this character. There's a lot of like weird irony and performance art in it. He wanted to really create something that was a much bigger, more engaging conceptual act. And again, just as a reminder, this is on a label that was putting out Lifetime. You know what I mean? This is on a label that was putting out melodic hardcore and stuff like that. And it was really odd to me that this was in there. I first get into Sex.
Clipping that.
There's another clip for you. Yeah.
Thanks.
That's in along with Mark's There's Too Many Blacks. I first get into this when I was using a site called Epitonic. And Epitonic was a sort of file sharing site, but it was like a voluntary file sharing site. This is when I got Blonde Redhead and stuff like that. And you kind of would go down a little, wormhole or a little rabbit hole rather, and it would link you to this and link you to that. And because I was listening to Sonic Youth and then I was listening to shipping news and stuff, suddenly I'm listening to Sex and I didn't know why. And it was because of the Jade Tree link. And so Jade Tree, in its own way, by having this on its catalogue via this medium of Epitonic, brought me to this whole world of like experimental, ironic electronic music that I hadn't really ever fucked with before. And in its own way, that kind of expanded my palette a little bit. I was like, I quite like this. I didn't like everything, but I quite liked it. It was taking a lot of chances, and it was a cool way to find it. So yeah, he ended up going on tour with people like Death Cab for Cutie. I think he went on tour with Dismemberment Plan, who I'll give a quick shout out to in a minute. And the kind of all indie and emo links kind of grew as he was this kind of oddball opening act for these much more conventionally indie and emo acts. I think he did another couple of albums the year after, including Marilyn Mansions. He toured with the Postal Service, which is obviously a kind of more electronic offshoot. Was it Death Cab that guy was from? Yeah, and so again, kind of straddling the lines between indie and electronic at this point. And then eventually he ended up putting stuff out that was much more overtly indie. I think he formed like a trio with somebody from
Hale Parks from Joan of Arc.
Was that it? Joan of Arc, right? So he kind of collaborated in a more expanded lineup, and it became like much more conventional music for a while, and then it went back again. And it's always been quite a malleable project, and I like that about it. It's very odd. It's inconsistent. If you're somebody that wants this album to sound like the previous album, you're not going to get that. But it kind of forces you to reckon with musical styles and sounds that you maybe haven't. And for me, that Epitonic period when I was just like, I was about 20 years old, it was really good for me to hear that, and it was really good for me to be challenged in that way. So yeah, he's a big fan of Nine Inch Nails, especially early Nine Inch Nails, like Pretty Hate Machine, Broken period. So whilst the music isn't as heavy as that, there's a lot of those kind of tropes in it, but it also makes it quite a lot of fun.
Yes, it's a really interesting track by an interesting artist. The next album's called Actual Fucking, which I just love.
That's right. Yeah, it's a good record as well.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess having that emo connection and being from Washington, it seems like he might actually be feeling from DC as well, which explains the Jade Tree like hook up there. There's something emo about the chorus in this song and the delivery. A lot of it's rapping, but when he does a little bit of singing, it kind of feels a bit emo. There's just some absolutely mental sounds on this. Some of the synths are almost discordant. It's very Nine Inch Nails, very Nine Inch Nails. I really liked it. There's a record by a band or a duo called Idea and Abilities called By the Throat, which is sounds a bit like this. In the sort of late 2000s, there was a couple of artists who were doing like industrial style indie hip hop, and the other one's Cage. And they were doing stuff like this, not as overtly abrasive as this, but a lot of similar sounds can be found on those kind of records. By the Throat record by Idea and Abilities was is their last album, and it is like you can hear I don't know their influence, but you can definitely just similarities between those kind of records anyway. You know, I love hip hop, and this does kind of come close to hip hop in terms of the flow for me. So
Yeah.
I did quite like this song, and again, it's just mind blowing that this is on Jade Tree Records.
It's another one that slips into an indie disco. If you're DJing, you can slam
Really?
it on, and you get a lot of people. No, honestly, you
Wow.
get. It's one of those ones that you get people coming up to the desk and being like, "What the fuck is this? This is mad." And like a bunch of his stuff is like that. That you can slip it into these sets and it works. It goes with the flow. It's good as a transition. See, if you're trying to go from like hip hop into something a bit more guitar based, it's great because of that harshness, that roughness that it's got to it. It helps smooth that. It helps graduate towards a different sound in a set. Yeah.
Now, Fran, this is the song I was most looking forward to hearing from you about. What did you think?
So it's spooky.
Certainly.
My mum would hate it. I enjoyed industrial emo. I like fucked up weird indie shit. It also has a fucked up weird music video. The only music video I could find out of all the artists. So that was fantastic. And there's a performance artist called Jocelyn Allen who dances to songs whilst wearing like a cat hat. And randomly, she dances to this. Because usually it's like YMCA and like big like bangers. So how the fuck that got on her radar? So when you mentioned indie discos, yes, you can dance to it. There's literal evidence on YouTube of someone dancing to Kill Me. So yeah, I quite enjoyed this in a bizarre way, Babs.
Well, I wondered because before I even knew about his love for Nine Inch Nails, I wrote exactly that. I wrote, especially when it obviously goes wild and then calms down again, and then I said it reminded me of whatever the name of the song is that Lil Nas X sampled for O Town Road. That's a Nine Inch Nails song. But because I think, like you say, Mark, there's definitely hip hop elements, and Fran isn't such a big fan, and there's really a lot of shout. Like I will read you out my notes, kind of point by point. Well, holy shit, this took a turn I wasn't expecting, both in terms of genre in the playlist and what you're expecting when the song starts. It's acoustic instruments with a kind of blurry synth. Okay, I'm uneasy. What's going to happen? Dirty, filthy synths. Man starts shouting and panting. And then, the fact that, it calms down and then he comes back shouting, things aren't getting better. Everything is only getting worse. And there's a sort of haunted accordion. And I was like, wow, this is an assault on the senses. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought this was really original. And when something like this hits me, I always go and wonder, well, what kind of genre is this? We've talked about industrial emo. I think Wikipedia classifies this album as darkwave, electronica, underground rap. Sure. And Chris, I wondered, for me, the most obvious comparison, I wonder if you'll agree, Hyper Christmas Tree Fuzz.
Absolutely. I was going to say this is one of those things that takes me back to the episode we did on Millionaire, because there are a lot of not necessarily sonic similarities, but like sensibility similarities, the willingness to subvert, the willingness to be a little bit funny but also accomplished in your musicality, and just generally unsettle your audience. I think it's the same with Millionaire. They do it as well, and some of the offshoots, and then it's got that kind of weird off kilter Belgian vibe. So the way it's soul wax fuck with people's expectations as well. It doesn't fit. And I think that was the thing that defined that episode we did. And I think it defines this. It doesn't fit. He's an eccentric. And that's also why I think, Beck obviously met with a lot more success. But I think Beck was coming from a similar place. Like a kind of both a sincere love and an ironic love of the tropes, and trying to meld that, to be funny, but to also do justice to what you're doing. And I don't listen to this a lot. I'm going to be clear. It's not something I bang on.
You don't,
really
brushing your
it.
teeth in the morning. You don't want to put the lyrics are so self-loathing. It's quite astounding. I was going to read them out, but I think we finish on a but I love that. I love listening to depressing music to get in the mood. But no,
don't want to finish on a trigger warning. Yeah.
But no, Hyper Christmas Tree Fuzz for me, because I don't know if you've seen Sex Live, another one, but I saw Hyper Christmas Tree Fuzz live, and when you see them live, like the industrial element is you really fucking feel it in the room, and I thought Sex would fit right in there. And but yeah, I'm glad, Fran, that you liked it. I wouldn't have expected it.
Can I actually just shoehorn something in very quickly here? So obviously Mark and I made a collaborative playlist here, and I got the lion's share. I got 3 of the 5, but there were 2 that I would have really liked to have had in here that didn't make it in here. And I don't begrudge Mark his choices. He deserves his moment in the sun. But These Arms Are Snakes are on this label, And I think These Arms Are Snakes are, whilst they're not Botch, they're a band that came after Botch and met with like a lot of good feedback, a lot of good press, a lot of credibility. That album, Auctioneers or The Line Sleeps When Its Antelope Goes Home, came out on this label, and that's probably their best record. A track on that you might want to check out, which is relevant to us, Babs, is Angela's Secret, where the bass is very musy. This is Brian Cook from Botch at his, maybe not at his best, but certainly trying to branch out and do something new. And they were another great band to feature under that umbrella. And the last one, we talked about it way back at the start, Pedro the Lion. Pedro the Lion, which is kind of like sad boy, kind of indie alt stuff, but he had a real ear for a tune. The album Achilles Heel, I believe, came out on Jade Tree. Foregone Conclusions from that, a really Lemonheadsy style song, miles away from what Sex are doing. Really well done. Also, Jade Tree used to put out these collections called Location is Everything. And the Pedro the Lion inclusion on Location is Everything Volume 1 is a track called Rapture. And I think it was also on their album Control in 2002. It sounds a bit like Far. It's a really great little underproduced indie emo thing. Maybe, yeah, really, really good. And so there were multiple choices we could have put on this that we didn't choose from our list, and every one of them was pushing in a slightly different direction, whether it was like some kind of weird pervy Nine Inch Nails Beck thing, over to this thing that sounds like the Lemonheads, over to this super cool New York alternative rock, over to this like Lifetime being this like down the line respected melodic hardcore band. Jade Tree took a lot of chances with their roster. They didn't rest on their laurels. They didn't try and play it safe. It didn't necessarily work out for them. Maybe not entirely their fault. They were coming after Discord as well, with the big crash in the value of music, basically. Like I said, I found it on Epitonic. We were already downloading MP3s overnight. Napster was happening. It's maybe not entirely on them that they didn't take. They just coming after that peak period of sales, and when you build this established fan base, they didn't have that luxury that Discord had. But I really feel that Jade Tree, whether you love as many albums on Jade Tree as you do in Discord, they deserve plaudits for how bold they were and how they took that model of Discord and decided to try and push the boat out a wee bit and try and represent something a bit broader, and see where it got them.
I think with the shoehorn came a very nice closing argument as well. So thanks, Chris. They're very, very passionate too. Mark, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, like Chris, there was other bands I would have picked that were not the bands that he picked that also pushed in different directions. One that springs to mind for me is Breather Resist, who are a mathcore band that were produced by Kurt Ballou. Their first record, Charmer, is equally as like mental as early Dillinger Escape Plan stuff, and that's really heavy and really weird. Jonah Matranga's best work is on this record label, New End Original. That album, Thriller, I think is perfect pop rock.
Is that not with the backing band not largely Texas Is the Reason?
Pretty much, yeah. But it doesn't sound like anything like Texas Is the Reason, which is pretty cool. Definitely sounds like Jonah. And then obviously bands like Joan of Arc and Captain Jazz. I mean, we can't leave this podcast without mentioning the absurd influence Captain Jazz have had on post-hardcore and emo bands. That sound, that mathy sound, a lot of bands have been doing. They started doing it in the mid-90s in 1995. You know what I mean? Bands are still doing that now. I think for me, the fact that Jade Tree are never really mentioned that in the same breath as having a strong and deep roster, not just compared to record labels like Discord, but also bigger indies like Asian Man Records, who, if you're a punk fan, you'll know, have had a lot of influential punk bands, or even like Epitaph or Vagrant. These labels who have released some really great records by a lot of, really great bands and really popular bands that they went on to have a lot of popularity. The fact that Jade Tree just kind of, because I think it's probably because it kind of vanished for a bit, and people just kind of forgot that that all these records were released by them, and then obviously Epitaph. I was kind of trying to bring it back into focus now. I think for me, there's no denying the fact that they're underrated, because whether it's a band like Girls Against Boys who put out one record, or it's a band like Lifetime who started out and did their entire career on it, that I think that the amount of roots and the amount of different, influence they've had in so many different genres, I think is a testament to how powerful this label is.
Fran, before you give your opinion, I wanted to ask you, because I've been pondering this throughout this record, like, are you someone who, when you discover a record label or when you discover a band that you like on a record label, do you then go on the website or the Wikipedia page to see all the other bands on it, or do you not do that very much?
I am currently on Wikipedia now, double checking record labels to see the roster.
There we go. Already had an influence on us.
Because I was about to ask you, is there a record label you would say are underrated yourself?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh God, see, I'm not knowledgeable enough about any record label in particular. Like when I think about what are the record labels that I know that bands are on, they're all the classic indie ones like Matador, 4AD, Mute, blah blah blah. But it's like I sometimes do that, but not very often. And it's just been so interesting to hear you guys talk so passionately and knowledgeably about like an entire record label's output. It's not just you don't just know the bands that you like, a lot of other bands. I don't think I have that. So yeah, I was really intrigued to do this as a kind of format of pitting two record labels against each other. But yeah, I think it's something that if I do, I don't do it in a completionist kind of way. I dip in and out. What about you?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say Mute, but I can't really say Mute underrated. They're probably too popular these days. So yeah, so I was going through like other indie labels, but unfortunately, like Fierce Panda, it doesn't give me enough bands on there to really. There's a record label called Alcopop at the moment.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah. So maybe I'll pick up Alcopop if I have to choose one.
Actually, well, and also obviously we've got to big up Jazz Life of Ben Hampson and Blood Red Shoes and all the bands that we've talked about a million times.
Oh yes,
yeah. But yeah, so overrated or underrated?
Jade Tree, definitely underrated. I enjoyed 4 out of the 5 tracks, so thank you for introducing me. I barely had heard of Girls Against Boys, and that was my favourite track on the playlist, so I definitely will be going back to checking them out. So thanks, Chris, for choosing that track, and thank you, Mark, for introducing me to some other mad emo. I thought maybe you listen to again. Who knows what's going to happen in the future?
You'll be hating on the punks, man. You'll be hating on the punks.
Yeah, I'm with you. For me, I think it was more 3 out of the 5, rather than 4. But I really enjoyed those songs. Yeah, I think Girls Against Boys and Sex a highlight. I'm really intrigued. Like I don't think I'm gonna go and dip into the whole back catalogue anytime soon. Yeah, I think I'm always thinking in my mind enough and discussing with Fran how much to dip into artists versus albums. And I think one of the reasons why I don't really go into record labels like that is because I just get very overwhelmed. If I see that, oh my God, I like this record label, there's 40 bands. What? Okay, am I going to listen to the 40 bands individually? Am I going to go into an album? And then I just leave it. Which is why I much prefer to do this podcast where knowledgeable people curate something and then we can go and listen to it and dip in and out as is. What I wanted to say is I was looking, I don't know if you guys know, but obviously for each episode we have a playlist, and on that playlist we put the songs on the playlist, but then I put songs from every band mentioned, and as you guys mentioned band after band, I was like, I think this is, I looked through all the lists. The longest list we have is 106 songs. It's because I combined our Eurovision playlist together. I reckon this is going to be 200 or 250. So thank you very much, Mark and Chris, for coming on. Please plug your podcast, your record labels, anything else you'd like to. Take it away.
Well, we're literally recording tomorrow night, so another 3-hour sesh in the offing.
Yeah, I think our record labels are dead, so let's not promote them.
Okay.
But,
much like any other label that doesn't use contracts, except Discord, they're long since dead.
I was in debt for about 10 years because I had record labels.
Yeah, we are, as we mentioned, we are doing a podcast this week on Perturbator. We've just released a podcast on 3 of the most painful records that you could ever listen to. Basically, we have a feature where the 3 hosts, myself, Mark, and Vicky, who's not here, we go to the pound store or a charity store and buy each other a record for £1 and have to give it like the proper treatment and try and engage with it. So this week we did Ed Sheeran's Divide,
Wow, I would not expect you to do that. Yeah.
Deacon Blue's Raintown and Ms. Dynamite's something or
A little
other.
deeper. A little deeper.
And it backfired because we thought we'd be really funny by trolling the others by getting them terrible records and forgot that we were also going to have to listen to them. And the episode turned out great. We had a really, really good time listening to it. It was very funny. There were a couple of bits that we had to bleep out, but you know what? That's how you know it was a good episode. So if you do just want to laugh, go and listen to that.
And your podcast name is?
Sorry, yeah. Fundamentals. Mark?
It's Unsung Podcast. We try to similar to yourselves, we kind of try to shine a light on either unsung artists or the unsung albums in an artist's catalogue,
such as Ed Sheeran,
obviously,
criminally underrated.
You know, and we've covered some of the bands we spoke about in this podcast. Some of the bands that we've spoken about we'll also do in the future. We've run the gauntlet from everything from Queens of the Stone Age most recently to, I don't know, what's the weirdest thing we've ever done? The Dirty Three.
Venetian Snares,
Venetian
33
Snares. Yeah. We've done a bunch of
Meshuggah.
hip hop as well.
Bunch of hip hop,
yeah. So Lil Kim did that recently. That was a highlight. Yeah. So, you know, we try to keep it as broad as possible and as diverse as possible. So there's probably an album by a band that you like on there.
Obviously, Fran and I would say that a great place to start is, of course, with the Muse Origin of Symmetry episode.
100%. Yeah.
Or the Millionaire Outside the Simian Flock episodes that we've guested on. And on social media, what are your handles?
Unsung Pod everywhere you go. And the website's unsungpod.net, so it's Unsung Pod for everything.
Thank you so much for coming on and schooling us in all the flavors of punk, hardcore, and emo. Unsung and underrated. We're out. Good night, everyone. Have a good evening.
Night.
Bye-bye.
And that completes our punk label classic with Unsung Podcast, Chris and Mark. Thank you, guys. And if you are a fan of punk, we have another over-underrated punk special in season 1 for you to check out. Thanks again for downloading, streaming this episode. Please like and subscribe. And also you can get in touch with us on social media. We are on Twitter at OUMusicPod, Instagram at OverUnderatedMusicPod, and we are also on Gmail at overunderatedmusicpod@gmail.com. Until next time, bye bye.